Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's great to see you all and hope you've had a great afternoon. And we're almost coming to the end of Token. It feels like it's just been so exciting and lively, and I guess we don't want it to end. But I'm quite excited about this topic. So just to open up, I'm Samantha. I'm the founder of YAP Global. We run a PR agency, and I used to be a journalist before, and I've been telling the crypto and Bitcoin story for 7 years now. One of my earliest clients was Bitmain, so I was talking about Bitcoin mining back in 2017. So I'm really excited to dig in with Muneeb and Orkun here about Bitcoin's next chapter. So just to set the scene here, let's talk about the state of Bitcoin. Bitcoin, up until now, well, I think in general, is seen as a secure, simple asset. It's regarded as the digital gold, right? But Muneeb and Orkun here are building things that are taking Bitcoin beyond it just being seen as a simple asset. So, Muneeb, do you want to start us off? What are you doing in the space, your background, and yeah, where you see Bitcoin heading?
Yep, absolutely. Excited to be here. I'm Muneeb. I'm the founder of Stacks. Think of Stacks as a Bitcoin layer 2 or L2. And I would actually make the case that, people are very familiar with L2s on Ethereum. That's their entire sort of like scalability roadmap. And I would argue that Bitcoin actually needs L2s more than Ethereum because Ethereum is fully programmable, even on the L1, it's usable, people can deploy capital, they can do things with it. Whereas Bitcoin, by design, is extremely simple, and it's not supposed to change. You can't really experiment with Bitcoin, you can't really introduce that many features. And all of that experimentation and new utilities for BTC will happen on L2s. And we're already seeing that. I think this was long-term time coming. I think we expected it to happen a lot sooner, but I think the industry is definitely coming around and realizing that Bitcoin is by far the largest asset class, the thing that's going to stick around for decades, and now the builders are coming and building these L2s, including Stacks and others.
Orkun, do you want to share about what you're doing with
Yeah,
Citrea?
Orkun here. I'm the co-founder of Citrea, and Citrea is the Bitcoin's first zk rollup. So we have been building Citrea for around 2 years, and like Muneeb said, Bitcoin actually made this decision like long time ago to stay as a secure and simple blockchain. And I think during the block size wars, like everyone was agreed that all the functionality and scalability needs to be pushed to the L2s, which now we are actually getting the real results. So on Ethereum, I generally agree the L1 is good enough to do most things, but for Bitcoin, the L1 is only good for payments. Obviously, people do tokens and inscriptions and other things, but it's not as efficient as you can do on L2. So the L1, I also think, should stay as simple layer. Where we basically build all the functionality on L2s and improve the custody experience, improve the programmability, so that we can offer better options to Bitcoiners than custodians and simple L1.
So, Muneeb, you touched on how the development of Bitcoin and the L2s on Bitcoin should have happened sooner. But last year we saw the approval of Bitcoin ETFs, and that's when we saw institutionals really paying attention to Bitcoin, and then now money flowing in. And so, yeah, if you look at the numbers, it's just Bitcoin is still growing, progressing, and you looking at the price is holding up despite the volatility in the market. And so that's exciting because there are a lot of people coming into Bitcoin, holding Bitcoin. And so, yeah, can you both speak to how the global perception of Bitcoin is shifting from just being a passive asset to one that, could do more than that?
I actually think that most people right now think it's a passive asset, right? Like you put things in the ETF. I don't think Bitcoin has any yield-bearing ETFs whatsoever, even though people are trying to have yield-bearing ETFs on the Ethereum side because Ethereum has a native yield. And I think once that goes through, my view is that there will be a lot of pressure on Bitcoin products as well, and that's something that we are seeing a very strong market demand for. That people have started looking for BTC yield. Like I think that's something we've seen this with Stacks, we've seen it with Babylon, and others. Within the last, I would say, 6 months or so, like thousands and tens of thousands of BTC has moved into protocols earning yield, and I think it's only going to grow with these institutional products once they come online.
Mm-hmm.
So Satoshi actually described Bitcoin as money, not like any sort of value or like some asset that you hold and do nothing. It actually needs to be used to be alive. The Bitcoin network depends on the transaction fees. The subsidies in the long term will go to zero. So people need to pay transaction fees, which means people need to use Bitcoin in their daily life. And ETF is probably not a good choice for it, but it's still happening. I think that's just one side of the things. But the other is basically the ethos of Bitcoin, that you need to hold your keys and you need to just use Bitcoin. And currently people just going to the other assets because they cannot do the money properties on Bitcoin. They think it's just payments, which is one part of the property, and other stuff that, for example, borrowing against your assets or minting a stable coin that's backed by that asset is just like separate things. People think it's not possible on Bitcoin, so they started to buying Ethereum and other assets to do such things. But now we see that actually this is changing, and we are realizing, okay, with like very different trust assumptions from a solution like us, from trust minimized to all the way to the custodians, you can actually do such things better than we think 5 years ago. So I think the institutional demand is just one side of the things, and the other side is definitely the people like us in this room is using Bitcoin in their daily life for variety of reasons and like variety of protocols.
I really like that. Just returning to the fundamentals of why Bitcoin was created. I mean, for me, what fascinated me about Bitcoin was that it is a peer-to-peer payment system. You're right. That's what Satoshi had, wanted it to be and planned for it to be. And I remember over the years, right, we've seen people to try to buy Bitcoin, buy their coffee with Bitcoin, buy things with Bitcoin. So yeah, it's interesting to see what, Citrea is doing with making Bitcoin more scalable and easy and cheaper to use. But then it's also good to add be real right now, as Muneeb mentioned, actually, it is still seen as a passive asset class. So I feel like there's a lot of education that needs to happen, re-education that needs to happen about the real purpose of Bitcoin. So do you want to add to that of kind of, where Bitcoin, what do you want to say, for example, to the new entrants who are coming into this space about Bitcoin?
I think education is definitely part of it, but I feel like I'll give you an example. Like when you go to the big Bitcoin conferences, like Bitcoin Miami, this year is going to be in Vegas and so on. I think over there, the ratio of engineers and developers who are trying to do anything with Bitcoin to just the non-technical people who are mostly there for Bitcoin as money or as a store of value is completely out of whack, right? Like very few engineers. Versus if you go to, ETH Denver or you go to Solana Breakpoint, the community is very different. Like it's very led by the builders and people. So I think that's your first interaction with the technology. It's like builder driven. Like they're building interesting things, and that's how the audience learns about Solana. When people experience Solana, it's less about education. There's so much to do already on the chain, and that's how people get introduced to the technology. So I feel like that's why in the Stacks community we almost tried having a lot of grassroots movement in trying to change the culture around Bitcoin by having a very strong developer community. And I think that's actually one of the biggest reasons why it took so long for this building on Bitcoin movement to start, even though it's such an obvious thing. Like there's $2 trillion of capital just sitting out there, and people can come and start building with it. But it did take a very, very long time.
Right. You make a good point because, I mean, when I started, doing PR for crypto projects, I mean, I said I worked with a Bitcoin miner, but then I started working with Ethereum. Of course, started, going to conferences like, Denver, ECC, and it was more exciting because there was all these DeFi applications being built, and then you were talking to developers on the ground. There was a lot of hackathons, but you're not seeing that in the Bitcoin ecosystem. And it's interesting because, Orkun, you said you entered the industry through Ethereum.
Yeah.
So what do you have to say about that as well? How can we encourage bridge and see a bit more of the builder action happening on Bitcoin?
Yeah, I think like the ordinals was the starting point for all this stuff, I believe, because it actually brought like a lot of attention from different communities all over the crypto back to Bitcoin. And this means that like, sorry about it. A lot of developers now was building on Ethereum before, and they realized like us, okay, now we can actually do some interesting stuff on Bitcoin, which we think was never possible before. And that was our entry point. We built on Ethereum, we built privacy systems on Ethereum, and now we actually realize that Bitcoin has ordinals. People put some dummy images on there, but what if we can actually put some other data instead of images and build some useful systems? And that's was we basically come up with this ZK rollup idea, because the idea was basically instead of putting images, we put ZK proofs into the Bitcoin transactions. So that led us basically create this ecosystem of applications, Citrea, and then we started working on what if we make the application developers experience better, which was launching our incubation program called Citrea Origins, that so far helped a lot of developers to get started their journey for building on Bitcoin. Every week I spoke with tens of developers, and each one of them says, okay, I got into Ethereum because I wanted to build applications on Bitcoin, but I failed. And there's a ton of example for that. The Tether started on Bitcoin, but became popular on Tron and Ethereum later because Bitcoin didn't have enough functionality to support all the stuff they do around their stablecoin. The same as the first prediction market, Augur. They first tried to build on Bitcoin, but it wasn't possible, so they built on Ethereum. And there are many such cases for that. And right now, with all the Origins program we do, and like the materials we produce for educating developers and help them on board to the ecosystem, is definitely changing the culture of Bitcoin, and I'm very happy about it.
Great. So that's interesting. So now we're getting to like shifting and changing the culture of Bitcoin, welcoming more builders. Let's just dive deeper into each of your respective projects. So Muneeb, could you tell us specifically, what's happening with like DeFi on Bitcoin? Can you just tell us the
Yeah, I
activity
can.
that's happening on right now to paint a picture of what could be possible?
Yeah, I can give you the perspective from Stacks. So Stacks mainnet launched in early 2021. So I think out of the Bitcoin L2s, I think we're one of the sort of like the larger one that has been in production for a while. And we have seen a lot of development, right? Like it's very exciting. People are building Bitcoin lending protocols. So you can actually take your BTC, and I'd really encourage people to go and actually try it. Like your perception for Bitcoin would just change because most people, I started in BTC around like 2013, and so they keep their Bitcoin, at least in my circles, on like Electrum, and it's like a clunky old wallet, like it feels like a decade ago. And now you can take that BTC and sort of like deposit it into the L2 and start using modern web wallets like Ledger or Xverse. And suddenly you almost feel like now Bitcoin has arrived in Web3, right? Like because that's a modern UX, and the speeds are fast. So Bitcoin runs at like 10 to 40 minute block times, but people are used to Solana. They're used to like having really fast transaction. But now you can have that with BTC, with the L2. So Stacks L2 would do a couple of second transaction confirmations, and the UX feels great. And then you can deposit your Bitcoin into a lending protocol like Zest, or borrow other assets against it. And I think that really feels like, okay, wow, Bitcoin is now a modern asset, right? And I can do things on chain. There are people who are, there's one app called Hermetica. They're building a Bitcoin-backed stablecoin. Right? We just heard a talk about stablecoins and people are doing interesting things. But imagine if the underlying collateral is actually BTC, which is the hardest form of money out there, right? So there's a lot of like interesting developer momentum happening on Stacks, and we were super excited about it.
That's really interesting. Thanks for giving us an overview of what you can really do with your Bitcoin. Because I think most people, and including myself, I've just seen Bitcoin as something that I've bought and then I've held, and not really done anything with it. But just to have a idea that firstly, even borrow, even lend, and also like staking, Bitcoin staking as well. Orkun, with Citrea, could you just
Yeah.
give us an idea of what you're seeing on Bitcoin?
Yeah, for us, I think like this why we started the incubation program was there are a lot of unique applications that built on Ethereum, and with Citrea, it's fully compatible with Ethereum and all the smart contracts. So you can actually copy the same contract, launch on Citrea, and instead of using ETH, it will automatically start using BTC, which is great to onboard developers. But one thing we realized is all the Ethereum applications and other ecosystems applications built for people who are already crypto native. So if you are using MetaMask and like other wallets, that this shows that you actually know how to use crypto, right? If you know how to connect your wallets and how to do swaps, that sounds very simple, but for most people, most Bitcoiners and people who we want to onboard to Bitcoin, they don't know anything about these. And just starting the same thing from scratch for all of them is not as efficient as you've seen. So for the incubation program, what we try to do is create unique experience towards Bitcoiners and people who will be onboarded to Bitcoin for the first time. Among those applications, for example, there is one called Tanari, which is building a passkey-based wallet, which means you can actually sign transactions using your Face ID and fingerprint. So you don't even need to hold a seed phrase to self-custody your funds, which is obviously there are some projects I think doing this on Ethereum, but most people don't use those projects because they're already onboarded to a tool. But now we have a chance to actually get those people there and make their first experience much better than the existent ones, so that we can actually have a sticky user base and people actually can like using these protocols instead of hating that UI is stuck forever and like waiting for 10 minutes for it to do a transaction and such things. So it's just like the main thing for us, create tailored experience for Bitcoiners and also the new buys, so that their first experience on Bitcoin is much, much better than the other ecosystems. So they don't have any reason to go into another ecosystem.
Great. So we talked a lot about how we need to shift the culture to see. So both Orkun and Muneeb have just shown us just how much you can do with Bitcoin, but the culture needs to shift. But do you see building more functionality on Bitcoin alienating the Bitcoin core community ethos?
I think it's a very, very sort of interesting question. The way I think about this is Bitcoin is more destined to like not change, and the rate of change might actually slow down over time as well. Like for example, especially if the L2s really take off, right? Then what the Bitcoin chain really needs to do is have a very good trustless way of moving capital between L1 and L2, right? So there are very few things that might be needed, and then Bitcoin like core can actually just sort of like freeze like in a way, right? Like of course there will be software updates and patches here and there, and but that could be very interesting because if Bitcoin is worth like trillions and trillions of dollars, you don't want the code base to change that much, right? Because that's the sort of like a value of Bitcoin, and those are the sort of like tension points that you get into with some of the, I would call them like the Bitcoin core community, because they approach everything as like, hey, no experimentation. I'm like, we are agreeing with you that no experimentation on the L1, but let's support enough things so that people can experiment on the L2. So I think there's obviously sometimes tension points, but I actually think we have more in common than it might come across as.
Interesting.
Yeah, I think Muneeb went through that process with all the Bitcoiners like a couple of years back from us, but the same thing is happening now. Like the soft fork discussion is a bit stalled at the moment, and Bitcoin is not upgrading for the last 4 years, which is a bit uncommon. I think it was generally 3 or 4 years to get each soft fork. But right now there is still, I think, a momentum to just like support these experimental ideas a bit more open so that we can actually see the Bitcoin's future. Because at the moment it's just captured by all the like institutions, ETFs and custodians, which is apparently not wasn't the vision. And preventing L2s also like or attacking them is also not solving any of the issues. So I think it's more now, especially the Bitcoin Core developers are more open to hear ideas about these L2 systems and like how we build bridges. Our bridges based on something called BitVM, which is a recent invention, and it actually allows us to have this trust minimized ZK verification on the Bitcoin L1. And there are some soft forks who can actually improve this process, and I see a lot of support to them, namely OP-CTV. I think OpCat is a bit more now alienated, but CTV is probably the next soft fork for me. I see that consensus getting together, and it's the main thing about CTV is obviously it helps Bitcoin L1, but it also helps a lot of Bitcoin L2, such as primitives like BitVM or the ARC network, which is any Lightning like L2.
For those that don't know, how do the Bitcoin core community or even Bitcoin developers like gather? Because Muneeb, you're saying the Bitcoin conference is mainly, I guess, yeah, leaders, and you don't see that many builders. And so, yeah, like, where do they gather right now? Is it just like online, and what is being done to see more hackathons happening and builders gathering together, like you see in Solana and Ethereum?
Yeah, so I think a lot of that is online. There are some Bitcoin L1 focus events as well. There's like D++, like this, some of these events. But it's a pretty small community, right? Like you go there, like 30, 40 people, and there's a big overlap between Lightning developers. So the historic thing that happened there was a lot of the Bitcoin community got behind a single project, Lightning, as the way that Bitcoin is going to scale, right? And in hindsight, like that's not how you do things, because you want to see tons of different experiments and then let the better experiments win in the market, right? So I think that decision of just fully getting behind just a single experiment actually limited the type of experimentation, other L2s, and so on. And I think some of that is still there, right? But it's obviously changing now. There are so many other projects. So there was, because of that historic fact, there's a big overlap between Lightning developers and the Bitcoin core community. So wherever sort of like you go to a Lightning developer meetup, that you will see like more overlap over there.
Interesting.
Yeah, especially most developers and like Bitcoiners are anonymous, so you don't see them in real life, right? They're mostly online. But also for creating applications, which is what actually reaches to the end user, not the core protocol. We as an EVM compatible layer can go to actually any event, right? We are sponsoring a bunch of Ethereum related hackathons, but that's essentially where all the EVM developers are, so that they actually build applications who will onboard the Bitcoiners. The Bitcoin L1 technical discussion is, I will say, a bit sandbox. Like, it doesn't go outside because most people don't care as long as they can use their Bitcoin. They don't care how they're doing it on the like opcode level or like a mempool policy level, whatever. So I think these discussions, like Muneeb said, happening in Bitcoin++, OP next, I think, one of the recent ones. Bitcoin conference still happening, but I will say those discussions are still good for developers like us, but for the outside of ecosystem and like the application developers, they don't matter that much. And I think that's a good thing too.
Interesting. Because I do think, yeah, it just sounds like there is a lot of work that needs to be done to shift the perception of seeing Bitcoin, that as activity that being built on the Bitcoin blockchain, but it doesn't have to be on the layer one, it has to be on layer two, and the scalable, solutions like Citrea. So I mean, are you both looking to? Do you want to reach new developers? Like, because I think every ecosystem as well, whether it be Ethereum, Solana, even now Aptos, they're going after more developers to build on their applications. So how do you both see doing that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the Stacks community has actually done a lot of work. I'll tell you some funny stories, right?
Yeah.
So
Tell us.
one story is that this is a couple of years ago. I was at a crypto event, and by the way, the crypto and Bitcoin communities, they sort of like are pretty separate, right? So the Bitcoin people, they don't even go and try to learn from the rest of the industry. They're very sort of like secluded, and vice versa. Not a lot of people go to the Bitcoin side. So, but I'm one of those folks who had like one leg in one community, the other in the other. So I'm at this crypto dinner in LA, and a friend of mine introduces me. This is Muneeb, the only person building on Bitcoin. Right? So I laughed. I laughed because it was sadly true, right? And that has changed a lot. That has changed a lot because of these L2s and more. So we very purposefully started doing like events, trying to sort of like bridge the gap between these two communities, and we'll notice resistance. Like the main Bitcoin conference wouldn't even let us like on their stage, right? So we would hack around it, and we would sort of like co-locate a developer event like right next to the main event, and then slowly sort of like try to build a profile. So it's been an interesting journey, but I think now the situation is much different.
Yeah.
Like
Interesting, because yeah, you're right. I mean, you see this. We're all in one industry. We say crypto, right? But there is this like the Bitcoin Maxi Club, and then there's the rest of the industry, and then there's Ethereum and Solana and everyone else. So yeah, it's interesting to see even the cultural differences and wars that are happening within our industry. But at the end of the day, what are we all here to do? We're trying to bring more adoption for this industry. So it's good to hear. Yeah, what's your take on? Because you've come from the Ethereum kind of developer community and builder side.
So I think for application developers, there are only very few things that matters. Is like, is there a business opportunity, and do I believe what I do here? And Bitcoin is most people's belief, actually, especially like the early days of Ethereum developers. They were all Bitcoiners, including Vitalik himself, right? He was building. He's the founder of Bitcoin magazine, and he was doing a lot of stuff around Bitcoin, and he founded Ethereum later. And bunch of the first generation of EVM developers was previously Bitcoin maxis, you call. And now, actually, most of the developers are still the same. They love Bitcoin, but they don't know how to build on Bitcoin, so they go to the other ecosystems. So I think the vision part is quite easy to match. The first part is the business opportunity, which is obviously big by nature. The Bitcoin's market cap is a couple times larger than any other asset. It's just like dominance is around, I think, 70% at the moment, which is insane. And there's little to no reason to build on any other ecosystem if you're able to build on Bitcoin. Because the business opportunity match, the vision usually match, which I respect also the other builders building on other ecosystems, because there's maybe some unique business opportunity that Bitcoin doesn't have. But usually, I think once developers are convinced to what we are building and how we are building, and that's basically knowing us, they're quite easy and like just getting onboarded to the ecosystem very easily.
Great. Well, I mean, the title of this panel is Bitcoin's next chapter, and so let's look at what's ahead for the Bitcoin ecosystem. What are both of your predictions for where Bitcoin's going to be in 2030? Now I realize that's like 5 years from now, but
yeah, I think the traction of the ETFs was very interesting. Like we got $60 billion of Bitcoin flowing into ETFs, and that really shook Wall Street, right? Like they've never seen something growing that quickly. And my sort of like big prediction in the next coming years is that the Bitcoin deposited in L2s and DeFi would actually flip the Bitcoin that's in ETFs. And I think that's a very interesting thing, because people are already getting, like the old school Bitcoiners are already getting concerned about how much Bitcoin is sort of like sitting in the ETFs, because it's very centralized, it's with like a very few custodians, and there's a centralization risk on Bitcoin if that trend continues. However, if the L2s take off and Bitcoin actually now goes into lending protocols like Zest on Stacks or other chains, that's actually decentralized, right? It's not sitting with a single custodian. It's decentralized, and then Bitcoin becomes more free. I think my other prediction is that Bitcoin payments would make a comeback, right? Like there have been technical reasons why people are not using BTC payments.
Yeah, when can we buy coffee again with Bitcoin?
It needs to be cheap and fast and an amazing UX, like you get on Solana. But if you can bring that sort of user experience to Bitcoin L2s, which we think we can, we're doing it, I do think we might see a revival of like direct BTC payments as well.
Interesting. Bitcoin revival, right?
Yeah, I think I like to see like applications, and I'm hoping to see more applications that's actually useful for like real people who is not able to access to the financial systems around the world. If we can build something that's useful to get people onboarded to Bitcoin and send money freely around, use their assets without going through banks or regulations and like their local limitations, I think that's an important thing. I'm Turkish, I'm coming from Turkey, so I really experienced that kind of struggle. And Bitcoin is a quick way to just solve this problem if we are able to build these applications. And I believe that there is enough developers to build all the applications we need for all the people who need Bitcoin in the next 5 years.
Great. I know it's besides the point, but everyone loves a Bitcoin price prediction. Do you both want to make a bold? I mean, even with both of your bold insights and what's going to happen. Like you said, the capital and DeFi is going to flip the money in Bitcoin ETFs. But yeah, where do you think the price of Bitcoin is going to be?
I'll tell you my mental model, right? Like I treat my Bitcoin as if it's going to be worth at least $1 million.
Yep.
Right. So if you're keeping Bitcoin and you wanna buy something with it, I sometimes joke, right? I don't liquidate, but I sometimes joke that hey, whatever this thing you're buying today, the amount of money is actually at least $1 million of one BTC, that equivalent that you're spending, right? So if you think of it that way, in terms of, and then it might take a bunch of cycles to get there, right? Like I've seen BTC go from 100 to 1,000, 1,000 to 10,000, 10,000 to 100,000. We're only one hop away of getting there. It might not happen this cycle, right? I think this cycle, the most bullish predictions that I've seen are more in the 200K range,
right?
Not in the 500.
I think it was yesterday on stage, Arthur Hayes predicted like Bitcoin to be 1 million in like 2028 or something. But it's interesting because that that Bitcoin pizza story, it keeps coming back. Like buying pizza, and then this is how much it would have been worth today. So I guess that's the story. What about you? Do you want to make? No.
I'm not good at predictions.
Okay.
And I'm not good at price as well. But I only hope one thing, that we price the dollar in terms of Bitcoin, but not the other way around. And that's my hope.
Cool. And just to wrap up, final thoughts. For all of what of the vision of what you both are building to come to reality, what do you want to say, or do you have like a call to action for the community? To consider for.
If you are building something, I seriously suggest consider building on Bitcoin. I obviously like to see all these applications on Citrea because I think it provides the best infrastructure. But I also think there should be multiple L2s for multiple different use cases. So just build on Bitcoin, and as long as it's self-custodial and it's useful for people, just build it.
Great.
Yeah, my call to action would be, when you guys go home, actually try to download something like Ledger. Actually try to move whatever amount of Bitcoin into the L2 stacks and try to use an app. Use Zest, use Granite. It would change your perception of Bitcoin. Like you would actually, the way you think about Bitcoin, it's almost like Bitcoin is getting a major upgrade. It becomes a modern asset that's fast, that's cheap, that's actually useful. So try it out.
No, that's exciting. And for me personally, for my peer firm, we work with a lot of I guess EVM compatible Ethereum based applications, but I'm personally quite excited about Bitcoin development, and I've been talking to a few projects, so I'm really excited about where Bitcoin is going to be. So you guys are pioneering it. So can we please give Muneeb and Orkun a big round of applause? Thank you.